check out this new way to play your PS5. Not only is a huge Xbox exclusive coming to PS5, but PlayStation is getting control over one of gaming's biggest franchises. And finally, we might be getting a new showcase for PlayStation games very soon. So let's jump into the PlayStation news. And before we do, make sure you're subscribed and have your notifications set to all. I know there were a ton of games that came out last year, and there were definitely some standouts for me like Deathloop, but overall, I would call 2021 pretty mid for video games. That happens pretty much every time we get a new console. The launch titles come out, and then there's a pretty big drought of new experiences while developers figure out whether or not they want to fully commit to the new consoles and leave the old generation with tons of users behind. Now, as far as exclusives go, Sony's done a really good job with the PS5 so far, in my opinion. We of course got Demon's Souls at launch and Miles Morales, we got Returnal, we got Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, but Xbox has been slowly building up a pretty decent library over there as well. Now, the big difference between Xbox and PlayStation used to be that Xbox games ended up on PC day one and PlayStation games didn't, and they still don't end up on PC on day one, but Sony's done a really good job porting a lot of their biggest games over, so I would expect that gap between a game coming out on PS5 and a game coming out on PC is going to get even shorter as time goes on. But while things are starting to get pretty even in terms of release strategy as far as exclusives go, Xbox has one thorn in its side that it really can't seem to overcome, and it's one that Sony does a much better job at fighting. So a lot of the games that we see coming to Xbox first come along with some pretty good deals that allow them to come to PlayStation 5 pretty quickly. One of those games being the Ascent. If you haven't heard of this game, it came out last year and I played it at launch. It was very buggy when it came out. It was really hard to get it to run right, and whether or not you played it on Xbox, you played it on the Xbox app on PC, or you bought it on Steam, it seemed like every version of the game had its own separate drawbacks, so there was really no good spot to play it. Now, thankfully, they fixed it pretty quickly. I think a month later, I went back and it was running pretty well on both my Xbox and my PC, but it's super frustrating that once again, this is another game that you kind of get punished for playing it at launch, because now we know it's coming to the PS5, and I'm assuming all of the updates and patches and all the different things that were added to the game are going to be there day one on PS5, whereas on the other consoles and the PC, it was pretty much a huge mess when it came out. Now, there's no release date just yet on the Ascent for PS5, but it's been rated by the ESRB, and when you start seeing stuff like that happens, that means it's literally just sitting there ready to come out. And the fact that this game came out in July on PC and Xbox Series X, I would assume that they've had the PS5 version ready to go since that happened, right? They had some deal with Microsoft to get the game on Game Pass day one that said, I don't know, you can't release the game for around 6 months, and now that 6 months has passed, they're ready to release it, and we'll probably see it pretty dang soon. Now, I actually played the game from start to finish around the time it came out, and honestly, it's pretty good. I actually think it'll be worth checking out on PS5, even if we do have to pay for it, because as far as graphics go, this is a real showcase. It's a top-down twin-stick shooter that's like a cyberpunk style RPG, but it's got a really strong art design, it's got an awesome soundtrack, and the loot system in it is actually pretty interesting. So it's not like something like Diablo or Destiny 2 where you get different guns all the time dropping in engrams and stuff like that. It's its own thing where if you get a gun, that gun is unlocked from that point forward. Like if you get another drop of that gun, all it's good for is like selling it. But once you have a weapon unlocked and you sell different duplicates of that weapon, you can use that money to upgrade the weapon and make it even better. And this game has a ton of different skills in it as well, so when you level up, you'll be able to build out your own character. It also has respecking, so if you don't like the way you've built out your character, you can kind of respect them. It has really cool co-op, so you can jump into other people's games no matter where they're at in the story, and you'll have your fully leveled up character, which makes it a lot more fun because it feels like your character, you know? It's not like it's going to drag you back in the story to get you to a point where your friend is at. You'll just be your super strong self, and you're going to need that extra help from stronger people because, man, some of the boss fights in this game are extremely hard. I was stuck on the final boss for like 2 days. It was one of those boss fights where I was just dying over and over and over, and then I said, you know what? I'm turning the game off. I'm gonna go to bed, and tomorrow I'll come back, and exactly that happened. I beat it the first try on the second day, and it felt awesome. So now that we know this game's coming out on PS5, it's gotten a ton of updates. It runs even better. It's actually gotten some new content updates, and they added a transmog feature in, which is a godsend because a lot of the armor looks really cool in this game, but you don't want to use the coolest looking armor if it's like not as good as a drop you just got later in the game, because the loot is predetermined. If you get something later in the game, it's generally going to be a lot better than the stuff you have at the beginning of the game. And like, yeah, some of the end game armor is pretty cool looking, but a lot of the beginning game armor is pretty cool, so it's good that they put a transmog feature in. If I had to put a score in this game, I'd give it like a solid 8 out of 10 back when I played it, and they've only added stuff since since then. So yeah, overall, I think this is going to be worth checking out when it comes to PS5. Now, I was just talking about how it seems like Xbox has a worse deal than Sony does when it comes to these timed exclusives, and we're just seeing that right now with the Ascent. We're seeing it in April with Stalker, because that is also going to be a timed exclusive on the Xbox Series X. And then on the Sony side of things, this exclusivity can seemingly last as long as they want it to. We've seen this in the past with games like Final Fantasy VII Remake. That was supposedly going to be a timed exclusive on the PlayStation 5, but Sony apparently keeps paying Square Enix to extend that exclusivity. Square Enix has only released Final Fantasy VII's Remake on PC and PS5 and of course PS4, and the PC version apparently is extremely screwed up, and we are not going to be seeing it anytime soon on Xbox. Another great example of that in the Final Fantasy realm is Final Fantasy 16. This was shown off at a huge Sony showcase. They showed off this like super dark tone. It's very gory. Apparently they have a combat director from Devil May Cry 5, which is all just music to my ears when it comes to Final Fantasy. And the last time I talked about Final Fantasy, I mentioned that a lot of people told me to play 12 because the action combat is apparently fun, but man, I looked in the comments and people told me again to steer clear from 12. I don't know if I'm gonna check it out. I've got a bunch of other stuff to play on my plate, like Final Fantasy VII Remake on my PS5 now that the PS Plus version comes with the upgrade. So I think I'm gonna go with that over an older game or this integrated one that's available on PlayStation now. And then finally, just off the top of my head, another game that Sony seems to be paying for exclusivity on in a weird case is Resident Evil 7's VR mode. We have Resident Evil 4 VR on the Oculus Quest 2, so they're also guilty of paying for exclusivity on that one. But yeah, I would really like to see Resident Evil 7's VR mode move beyond the PlayStation VR 1, because that's the only VR game that's ever gotten me sick. It got me extremely sick. I don't want to play it on the PSVR because it's just so old at this point, and VR technology has just moved so far past the PSVR 1. It's annoying that Sony keeps that mode locked to the PlayStation 5. But people are kind of wondering how long this exclusivity deal Sony seems to have with Square Enix is going to last, and according to Video Game Chronicle, which is a super reputable site, I use them all the time in these videos, apparently Xbox players are going to be waiting a very long time before they get a chance to play Final Fantasy VII Remake or Final Fantasy 16 or really any other future Final Fantasy game, because apparently Square Enix is just totally happy with this agreement that they have with Sony, to the point that they're going to stick with this exclusivity deal for the rest of this generation. So yeah, you heard me right. You might be waiting until the next console generation to play some of these Final Fantasy games on your Xbox. And I know people are upset about this because it's been trending on Twitter for a long time now. Now, me personally, I don't know. I don't really have a horse in this race, to be real with you guys, to be frank here, because again, I'm not the biggest Final Fantasy fan. We still see a bunch of Square Enix's stuff coming to Xbox where it matters to me, like Outriders. Being able to play that on Game Pass day one was great. But if I was a Final Fantasy fan, I would obviously be pretty frustrated, because we've seen a lot of Final Fantasy games coming over to Xbox slowly but surely. Like Final Fantasy 15 was on Xbox. We've had some older games coming to the console. So yeah, people were getting excited to be able to play these games on their Xbox Series X, and now apparently Square Enix has changed their mind because of money. So yeah, I can see why that's frustrating. But if you look to the past here, Square Enix has done the same thing multiple times. Like the first Final Fantasy games, the first few of them were exclusive to Nintendo consoles, and then starting with 7, 8, and 9, they switched over to PlayStation, and then it took a long time for Final Fantasy 10 and 12 to come over to Xbox consoles or pretty much any other console, you know? Like, this has happened in the past, so it's not really that surprising that they're going to take some development money to make sure this game comes out AAA as well. I know the balanced take here is to be like, exclusives are bad, especially third-party exclusives, but my main console is the PS5. I have a PS5. I was planning on playing Final Fantasy 16 on the PS5, so yeah, I don't really care all that much. I just like, I'm gonna buy it day one because I've known from the beginning that this was going to be at least a timed exclusive on PS5. I just hope that this is not the reverse of that Xbox scenario I just talked about, where eventually it comes to the Xbox Series X in like a year and it's got all the patches and all the extra content that has been released for the game, because that would be super frustrating. So in my last video, we mentioned a guy named Tom Henderson because he pointed out that during the CES PlayStation Showcase, they might have shown off the new updated character models for Joel and Ellie in the remake of The Last of Us, which yeah, that's a whole different story. There's going to be a full-on remake of The Last of Us that started in like Naughty Dog's tiny little internal team, and then the big boys over at Naughty Dog were like, what are you guys working on over there? And they were like, whoa, this is coming out pretty good. So they took over the whole thing, and eventually later this year, apparently, we're going to get The Last of Us Part 1 Remake and a new multiplayer game in The Last of Us universe that started as the multiplayer mode for The Last of Us 2. There's your cliff notes on this whole event. But Tom Anderson, the guy who revealed all of this to us, is coming back with a new rumor that seems pretty big and pretty believable, that not only are we going to get a state of play in February, but it's finally, supposedly, going to be a very big one. The reason I say supposedly is because we've had rumors like this before where we have a state of play that's going to come up, and guys, it's going to be the big one this time, and then it happens and it's like, here's 5 indie games that you've already heard of and a trailer for a game that you've never heard of but doesn't really look that good. All right, see you guys next time. The best state of play in my opinion, honestly, was the one where they just had 17 minutes of gameplay of Horizon Forbidden West, because at that point it was like a PlayStation exclusive we hadn't seen in a while, and we just got to finally see it played. But these showcases they do, like the ones they do during the summer or the one they did later last year, those are usually where they show off the biggest games. So if they can figure out how to get some of that energy transferred over to this February state of play, that would make it a lot more interesting to me. So the games that we could potentially see here, obviously if it's at the beginning of February, we're probably going to see some more Horizon Forbidden West. We could get a new God of War trailer. That would be great to have a God of War Ragnarok trailer. We'll probably get an Uncharted Legacy of Thieves release date for the PC version, because right now that doesn't really have a release date, which is kind of weird. I think it's finally about time that we could see Hogwarts Legacy, because the latest rumors we've heard about that game is that they're in the home stretch here. They're doing a lot of the text treatments, they're filling in a lot of the lore, they're doing the loading screens, you know, all the stuff you do when the main chunk of the game is finished. Like, it's probably at 80 or 90% completion, and this game is supposed to come out last year, so hopefully they're pretty close to being done, because I know people do not want to wait for Hogwarts Legacy any longer. And again, that's a prestige brand that would be awesome to see at a Sony event, especially if Sony can come out and be like, man, this one's gonna have some exclusive content on PS5, get ready for that. That would be a really cool thing again to see. That Last of Us remake I just mentioned, along with the multiplayer game, that would be an awesome thing to announce at an event like this, especially with a release date. It seems like both of those things are pretty close to being complete. I think we're going to get both of those games this year, which is great. It would also be extremely cool if we got the Jedi Fallen Order 2 teaser for that May event that we have to look forward to, Star Wars Celebration, where they're supposedly going to blow the door off and show us some gameplay and a full reveal of Jedi Fallen Order 2, which I am very, very excited for. And the last news story I have for you guys today is a cool, kind of wholesome one that just made me happy when I saw it. So the PS5, unlike the Xbox, doesn't really have a full-on accessibility controller that makes it easier for people who can't hold a regular controller to play video games. So while we wait for Sony to come up with their own version of the accessibility controller, a guy at home broke out his 3D printer and designed his own attachment for the DualSense that makes it playable with one hand. Now at first I know this looks like it might be a little complex, but as someone who has a 3D printer and has printed a ton of different things on it, I think this one would actually print pretty well and be pretty easy to assemble and get installed on your DualSense controller. Even if you wanted to just try it out, you can go on this guy's YouTube channel, Akaki Kumari. That's the footage you're seeing of this controller being used right now, and you can actually download the STL file for this attachment for free. So if you know someone who needs it or could use it in their life and you want to be a cool person, you can download the STL file, find someone with a 3D printer or 3D print it yourself, and show up and be a cool guy with a cool gift for your friend who wants to be able to play games with one hand. Now if I was Sony, I would be offering this guy a job right now, because he's clearly got some cool design chops. He's got a cool design for a DualSense attachment here, and honestly, I would start making these over at Sony HQ in high quality and just have people get them for free, right? It can't be that much in plastic to make something like this, and it'll get more people playing the PS5 if they can find one, and that means more money in my pocket because I'm the one making and selling the game. So taking the hit on this free attachment for people who really need it, that's not only good PR, it's the right thing to do. Anyway guys, that's all the PlayStation news I have for you today, so make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments below, and remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.